Hello, and welcome to the Power of Email Hygiene and Verification, brought to you today by Webbula and the Relevancy Group. My name is Nick Einstein. I'm VP of Research for the Relevancy Group, and I am joined today by our CEO and founder, David Daniels, as well as Brian Ward, who is Chief Marketing Officer of Webbula. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen. Looking forward to getting into the content today. Webbula, a little bit about our sponsor. Webbula bundles industry-leading email verification and email hygiene, creating the world's most comprehensive email threat detection solution, Cloud Hygiene. Since 2009, thousands of email marketers have relied upon Cloud Hygiene to safeguard their brand reputations and email campaigns, recognizing the hidden threats before they negatively impact their bottom line. Webbula identifies and mitigates email data threats and bounces to protect your sender reputation, defend your marketing ROI, and increase inbox deliverability. For sponsoring this Webbula. For those of you who don't know, the Relevancy Group is a research advisory and consulting firm. We cover virtually everything under the digital marketing umbrella, from every channel marketing and social marketing to identity management. We also publish the Marketer Quarterly, which is a digital magazine for marketers by marketers. As the title indicates, it comes out quarterly, new issue coming out very soon. And it is also available on all the major app stores. We encourage you to pick it up. A little bit about logistics before we dig in here. Please feel free to submit questions as we go via the Q&A tab in your kind of GoToWebinar toolbar. You may also tweet us with the hashtag TRGWW. I'll be keeping an eye out for those. Follow us on Twitter at the Relevancy Group. We are going to be following up with an email with a link to a recording of the webinar, as well as a copy of the research. And that email will likely hit your inbox tomorrow. Before we kick it off, a little bit about the data we're going to be digging into today. Research just conducted by the Relevancy Group, sponsored by Webbula. Data comes from a survey that was in the field of June this year, 406 executive marketers, a nice mix of executive marketers among industries kind of concentrated in financial services, manufacturing, media publishing, retail, e-commerce, tech, high tech, but a nice mix across verticals, as well as a nice mix within those enterprises, 60-40 enterprise to mid-market, but a nice mix of responders within those enterprises and mid-market marketing departments, from CMOs through directors and down to managers and practitioners. So a nice representation. We also have data here that was in the field in Q4 of this last year, and that's consumer data that comes from a consumer survey of over 1,000 consumers, and was in the field in Q4. With that, I am going to kick it over to David Daniels to dig into the research. David.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you all for joining us today. Great to have you all with us. So I'm going to start out with a sort of a sad story, but by the end of this webinar, we're going to give you great tactics to hopefully get you to be optimizing your inbox and deliverability rates and all the great results to go along with those improvements. But for now, we sort of have to start with this story of decline. And again, this is from some of that survey data Nick just referenced, actually trending back to a survey that we did back in 2015. So you can see that the last few years here, the mean inbox or deliverability rate in decline over this period of time. You can see here it's leveled off, but it's been trending downward over the last 3 years, and as of the second half of 2008, has dropped to about, exactly 87.18%. And the inbox providers, whether they're the consumer on the ISP side or on the corporate side, they certainly have their hands full battling illegitimate email that floods our servers on an ongoing basis. And there's multiple methods of identifying and acting on malicious mail streams, which is why we're going to talk a lot about today, not just one way to do email hygiene, but multiple methods of email hygiene coupled with verification. And we really need to take that really robust approach because legitimate messages are being blocked and sent to the bulk folder or quarantined in such a way to really render them, basically useless to the end user. And again, this is because many of the inbox providers are using multiple methods to guard against malicious threats, and often this results in false positives, or there could be data within your own list that you might not be aware of that is driving you to look like a malicious sender when in fact you're not. So it's important. The other thing that is important right now when we think about getting messages into the inbox is, of course, being relevant. And if you're a fan or a patron of the Relevancy group, you know that we talk about relevance quite a lot. And this is the consumer data that Nick was just sort of referencing from Q4. And, what do you like about email marketing? Which behaviors have you done? Were the sort of the multiple questions that we asked people here in this data that I'm presenting. And the top two answers why people opt out of or ignore email, even for things they've opted into, is because of frequency overload, or it's just not relevant to them. But look at the number of people that are saying, almost the equal number, saying, I like an email when it includes products that are relevant to me or products that I've viewed online. So you're going to have a higher rate of engagement, and we've proved this, if you're sending mail that is relevant. They're more likely to engage, that is, click on those emails if you've done this, or including those sort of relevant products or relevant offer, relevant content. And we know that many of the ISPs are now using engagement as a way to meter the inbox. And again, this gets back to the notion, if you have real email addresses, if you're practicing verification and multi-method hygiene, you're going to have more legitimate or real users on your list. So the likelihood of their engagement is going to be higher than it would be if you're not verifying and doing multi-factor method hygiene on the front end. And so that's one reason in part why we'll start to show why deliverability rates are better if you use this, but it's certainly a portion of that. So consumers certainly reward brands that recognize them as individuals or being relevant, as do some of the ISPs, including Gmail, which represents most of the consumer inboxes out there today. So let's start talking about here to what we believe, to improve deliverability, you must use verification and hygiene. And we'll get into what we mean by hygiene in just a moment in great detail. But you'll see most people here, 41%, are at the time of opt-in, they're utilizing a vendor to verify in real time that an email will not bounce, will bounce or not, rather. And so that's the tactic that's mostly being utilized, and we see almost as a little bit more than that, almost 50% of marketers are looking to adopt that within the next 12 months. This tactic is highest among enterprise marketers, those that have more than 1,000 employees, at 46%, and the mid-market brands, those that have less than 1,000 employees, have an adoption rate of about 34%. Verification is necessary to ensure that the email is not going to bounce, but does little or really nothing to guard against malicious reputation and fraud threats that only hygiene can provide. And not just hygiene, but the multiple methods of hygiene that are necessary. In fact, really sort of unique to Webbula, which we're going to get into great detail about. But just 14% say that they're using email hygiene to ensure that the email is not a spam trap or toxic. And really, you've got to understand the looming importance of this threat. And we see here there's a huge portion of the market, 71% are saying, we're now getting aware of this, we're going to adopt this in the future. But we'll be able to show you here in just a moment that those that are already doing it are having better results than those that are not. We've also seen that despite the lower adoption of these hygiene tactics, marketers tell us in this survey that they're confident in the ability of verification of hygiene solutions to positively impact performance. When we asked about confidence, 53% of marketers said they were very confident in the ability for verification of hygiene solutions to positively impact deliverability and revenue. And so it's really to sort of that old adage about garbage in, garbage out, to really start to build your program and optimize it. It absolutely begins with having quality addresses that are verified, as well as using hygiene to ensure that there's not bots and other sort of toxic elements within your list that can be harmful in a number of ways. And so the other thing that we'll talk about a little later on too is practicing email hygiene by uploading email lists to a vendor. So that would be if I already have a list and I've never sort of scrubbed it. That's something that you certainly should be doing, and something that our sponsor Webbula can absolutely help you with. So what we have here, and Brian Ward is going to take us through this in greater detail, but just to sort of introduce this topic of real-time verification, it's absolutely necessary. So verifying at the time of opt-in that the email address is valid is an excellent thing to do, but it's an incomplete defense. So to improve deliverability and suppress against these multiple threats, we're talking about not just the verification part, which again is a process that detects against hard and soft balances and removes undeliverable email addresses that bounce. And again, that's happening at real time at the point of opt-in. But the other things are, hygiene to protect against reputation threats. So these would be the malicious moles or legal and spam traps, honeypots, blacklisted emails, things that are going to really negatively impact your reputation across the board to many ISPs that subscribe to these sort of reputation lists. Protecting against fraud threats. So this would be those insidious bots or content spammers that often, particularly if you're a large brand, can lead to phishing scams and fraudulent activities. The Relevancy group, we were just had something with Russian bots doing almost denial of service attack on our site recently. So it's certainly something that we're recently familiar with and have had to change our processes around that because of it. Protecting against deliverability threats with as with verification, this is removing improper domains, invalid addresses, but it's a necessary aspect to keep your lists clean. And then protecting against conversion threats, and Brian will get into this in much more detail, but these are people that typically complain. They're people that are maybe subscribing that aren't necessarily in your target market. .gov addresses or things of that nature. So we'll get into that in a bit, but I just sort of want to introduce that concept. So the one thing to also recognize, and I'll prove this to you in just a moment, but believe or know that sometimes people think of hygiene and verification as sort of a cost center, and it is absolutely the opposite of that. It's actually a profit center, or it's a way to absolutely ensure that you're not just improving the deliverability of your list in general, but you're growing it in such a way that you're growing it in a healthy way, and that there's those people on the list that are absolutely going to be engaged and converting, and we'll show you that in just a moment. But here's the data from this latest survey about the annual budgets for hygiene and verification, and it's absolutely a mission critical spend. So the mean reported marketing budget for respondents was $71,000, just over $71,000 a year, with enterprises, those enterprise marketers coming in over just under $81,000, and the mid-market firms spending about $60,000. Now, spending for this is based typically on subscriber sides. It's like on a CPM basis. So this survey, our mean sender size, mailing size per month, I believe was about 13 million. So it's skewed larger. So this budget is, I think, in response to that, which might be a little bit higher, but standard pricing for verification and hygiene is based on the number of email addresses being processed. So you can sort of figure that out as a way to guide your budgets. But also know that the mean average customer growth for marketers in 2018 is projected at 10%. So you've got to also figure out, as you're growing your list and the money that you're appropriating to acquisition sources, you've got to spend a commensurate amount for hygiene as a line item, so that as you're spending more on acquisition sources and driving more people to your website for email acquisition, that this is in parallel with that. This spending is in parallel with that. So necessary source for optimization for sure. So so now let me explain why we know this to be true. So what we did here was we looked at those who are using verification and multiple methods of email hygiene, and we looked at their performance, and we found that they outperformed those marketers that were not using email quality and hygiene checks at all. And these are based on their actual performance metrics. And when we look at that mean annual budget for email verification and hygiene, it's ROI positive, and that's why we believe it's necessary to positively advance email marketing revenue. So again, what we did here was we looked at those marketers utilizing email verification and multi-method hygiene and put them in a control group. We looked at their everything from the deliverability metrics, open, click conversion, as well as average order value. And we found that everything was higher. Even the average order value was almost 4% higher in these two control groups. So there's obviously tangible benefits of utilizing accurate email addresses that represent actual, individual prospects and customers, and it's going to lessen the deliverability headaches. We didn't necessarily attribute a cost to that, but you can also imagine there's less, there's probably an opportunity cost that we didn't capture at all here around you're not spending as much time talking to your deliverability counterparts that might be triaging with ISPs or blacklists or things of that nature. So there's that opportunity cost that's not even represented here in this model. But if you look at some of the numbers, and the research goes into this in great detail, but one thing that we're seeing is that those that are utilizing the data quality tactics have a larger send size. They're sending more email a month. Their lists are bigger because, again, they're driving a higher quality audience and one that has a positive delivery engagement can be mailed at a higher frequency, right? So if they're engaging more, you're not going to get penalized from Gmail and the like. If they're engaging more, they want to get more email, and there's a point of greater return there. So there's a higher revenue per subscriber for sure. There was improved deliverability. So again, those that are embracing the tactics had an deliverability inbox rate that was about 1.27% higher than those that did not utilize it. We saw the open and click-through rates for those data quality-minded senders were about 1 1/4 to 1 3/4 above those operating without hygiene. And the conversion difference was about 0.5 point, but still favored senders using verification and multi-method hygiene. So when you look at this, and we say the all-participant mean of monthly email send size was 37 million in this data set. We look at this and we go, the results show that those that utilize these data quality methods have a 38% higher email marketing monthly revenue than those that don't. And so that's about $2 million in additional revenue on a monthly basis. And again, this is we applied the actual the actual performance metrics to the mean size of 37 million messages. So you could take these same metrics and apply it to 12 million messages. You know, the benefit's still going to be there, but the amount of the monetary difference is just going to vary based on how much email you're sending, obviously. But it shows that there's more than enough benefit to implementing verification in this multi-method email hygiene. And again, we know that this proves that it's not a cost center. It is absolutely a profit center. So we think that's a great proof point to suggest that you should be using these methods to improve and optimize your mailing programs. With that, I'm going to take a pause before we take questions and pass it over to Brian Ward, and he's going to give you some additional detail on what Webbula is doing and really break down what is multi-method email hygiene. Brian, take it away.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Nick, for going through at least the overview of the research paper and for the opportunity. We talked a lot. You've heard David and Nick talk a bit about multi-method email hygiene, which Webbula we call cloud hygiene, which is a bundled service that includes verification and email hygiene. And essentially, multi-method means that it has 30 plus filters that are part of it. And what we're going to do today is that we've categorized those into 4 different threat categories. So before we get started on it, I'll just do an overview. This is kind of an overview of most of the filters that are part of cloud hygiene. But before I go into the details, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. The data that we're comparing to is all self-reported deterministic data that Webbula collects, and we never use modeled data. We get our data from over 110 different data sources that we work with on a daily, weekly, quarterly, and yearly basis. So all that data is constantly being updated and constantly being evaluated against each other. Our data set is under constant adaptation and change and verification. So when we take in data from our customers, that data is never destroyed or cached. Well, we don't do any of that. So essentially what we do is we take that data, we compare it to our data set, and we identify and tag the emails that fall under these different kinds of filters, so that the customer can then decide what their risk level might be. You know, some things are more risky than others, and perhaps they have very different criteria that they want to work under. So that's part of the customization. Part of the customization also comes from the fact that filters can be turned on and off, or filters can also be scaled. So we can turn them all the way up or turn them down depending on what the client's needs are. So let's go through each one of the categories briefly. We'll talk a little bit about reputation threats. As David had mentioned earlier, reputation threats are the real nasty stuff. You know, the blacklisted emails, seeded trackers, and most popular of all, sadly, are the malicious moles, the bots, and spam traps. Now, there are tons of different kinds of spam traps, but the important thing to know about them is that they are real emails that can receive, open, click, and track your campaigns. So that's a little different than the inactive threats that we're used to with verification, which are essentially soft and hard bounces and typos. And then spam traps are more active. So they're active threats that are, really out to get you and hurt your campaign. Excuse me. It's a lot like your mom probably told you when you were growing up. Your reputation has a lot to do with the kinds of people that you hang out with at school. And it's kind of the same thing. That's why it's a reputation threat, So it's kind of if your campaign, your data is hanging out with the wrong types of people, then that's going to affect how the ISPs and how ESPs look at you. So that's why those are. So let's move on to fraud threats. Now, when we think of some of these, we think a lot of times about the types of data that you have on your hands, but a lot of the data comes from somewhere, right? So just this past week, we had a situation with a national restaurant chain who was giving out was having a free offer for free fries. So if you signed up for their offer, your name, address, and email, and they would you would get free fries with your meal. The problem was, as it turned out, that people were signing up 5, 10, 20 times or more, and each time they were signing up for the service, they were getting free fries, but they were also inputting fraudulent emails. So all those fraudulent emails get put into the data set that the client is for all good purposes, trying to collect information from their customers so that they can, communicate with them. And then, so that's just one way that fraud at the input level, fraud can impact your data. So you're relying on a system that is full of bogus usernames, numeric usernames, emails associated with phishing scams. All of those things can, even sometimes inadvertently, at the point of input, get into your data. So delivery threats are another one. So one of the things that we've been seeing an exponential rise in lately is disposable domains. Those are becoming increasingly popular online, especially among the younger generation. I was telling Dave and Nick a story earlier about my son, excuse me, who was signing up for LinkedIn, but he doesn't have a LinkedIn account. And so within less than a minute on his phone, he had signed up for a disposable domain email and signed up for a LinkedIn account. So he only intended to have it for a few minutes. But this is a growing problem. Just last week, as a matter of fact, a large auto manufacturer who was doing everything correctly, who was sure about their data. But what they were doing was they were incentivizing their salespeople to get customers in for a test drive. And so incentivizing them meant, basically, essentially data collection, names, addresses, and again, email addresses. What they didn't know until last week was that a lot of their salespeople, in order to earn these incentives, were entering false email addresses based on the customers' names, either because the customers didn't want to give out their email addresses, and so they just added them, or for nefarious purposes, which doesn't matter. What does matter is that these emails were getting into the data, and they weren't true. They weren't associated with the people who were coming to the auto dealership to take a test drive. So that's another way that disposable domains are impacting data, the sets that we'd get, because those are essentially emails that are created temporarily and then go away. But how would you know, right? So you're sending out the email and it's not actually there anymore, it's dead. So that's a big problem. The next set of is called conversion threats. And what Dave was talking about earlier, and this is becoming obviously a more and more important as things have changed with data privacy, with customer rights, with the GDPR changes. Engagement rates are becoming more of a reliable sort of metric that more and more companies like Google are taking into account. And the conversions these are where some of that engagement can be a problem, like we were talking about with disposable domains, but also with the types of people who are known, we label them as complainers. Those are people that typically complain about getting unsolicited emails or even emails that they think are unsolicited, because a lot of times people forget they signed up for something, right? So they get the email in their inbox and they complain to their provider that they're getting spam, or screamers who are just 100% dedicated to never getting any of that stuff in their email. So there are ways that we know who these people are, and that we can see that they're in your data, and that it might be in your best interest to avoid sending them emails to begin with. Really, all of multi-method email hygiene, all of cloud hygiene is built is for data intelligence, to put the power of letting you know what's in your data and putting that in your hands so that you can make informed decisions that affect your marketing. And that's really what it comes down to, is we're not changing any of your data. We can correct typos. We can point these things out for you and label them so that you know what you're getting into. And then you can make informed decisions about how you want to proceed with that information. So that's really, in a nutshell, what cloud hygiene is all about.
I dig it.
Yeah.
Great stuff.
Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. We have a bunch of questions rolling in here, and I'd encourage the audience to put them into the window as they come up here, because we do have some time to take them. First one coming out of the gates here, and I might even kind of modify this a little bit just based on some of the data, and this goes back to, I think, tactics utilized for email verification and hygiene, and on slide 11 we had some data there around utilization and plans to use, and it seems to me that currently we have 41% of the audience was currently using some sort of verification. Only 14% was using some sort of hygiene, but 71% were saying they were planning on using hygiene this last year. And I was wondering, we hit on a little bit of it in your slides there, Brian, but do you see, it seems to me that a lot of people need to use the combination because email is more important than ever before. And email contribution to revenue is higher than ever before, but also the risks are higher than ever before. And I think you just went through some of those. But what are your thoughts there on just the fact that 71% of the market isn't currently using any hygiene in combination with their verification, but is planning on doing that this year?
Well, I think it's a natural progression of how the world is changing. The marketing world especially, is changing a lot under our feet every day. And with GDPR, with the changes to consumer protection, consumer privacy, the data breaches that we've been seeing, a lot of that in people's minds gets tied together, right? And a lot of it is tied together. So I think a lot of those factors are starting to surface in the marketers' minds, that perhaps, just blindly sending out millions of emails, where are they going after they leave their hands? And, who's responsible for the consequences of those things? And then also, consumers are becoming more intelligent and more wise to, labeling things and driving them into their spam folders and organizing them and opting in and out. Now we've got a lot of pressure on marketers to use double opt-ins to confirm and to make sure that the data they're using is accurate. And I think that a lot of that is all sort of going into the pot of we've got to really step up and take greater responsibility for the data we're relying on and what we're using and where that's coming from.
Yep, makes very good sense. Very good.
Which is all good, right, for consumers. It's good news for consumers. It's good news for the clients. It's good news for businesses, because the more accurate the data we're all relying on, the less trouble there's going to be for all of us. Right.
Yeah. It's good news for inbox providers too, right? They don't have to. It's win all the way around. Totally. Indeed. Another one coming from the crowd here. We have some suspect lists that we haven't sent to for a while. As a result, is that something that Webbula can help out with? So not only just on the front end, but if we have existing data that might be suspect, is that something that you guys work on?
Yeah, excuse me. Yes, absolutely. As we all know, we've seen the percentages. Every month that passes, a certain percentage of your emails are going to go bad. People are moving, changing jobs. Unfortunately, passing away. Emails get transferred, they get abandoned. A lot of things can affect deliverability, and this happens. Time passes, and certainly that's why we strive so hard to keep our data as up to date as humanly possible, so that we can provide fresh, data. We can connect consumers that you may not have reached out to for a long time with current information. Another aspect of our business too, because we rely on this huge pool of data, is we also do data appending services, which if you only have postal addresses or you only have emails, we can fill in the missing pieces in your data for you as well. So that's another very powerful tool that could help keep your data up to date.
Right. Nice. And that actually kind of leads to another question here from the crowd. Verbatim, would you equate inbox tools from response path, litmus, and 250 OK to that which Webbula offers? And I believe they might be referring to return path there, or response path. Brian?
Well, I don't really want to talk about our supposed competition. I know I know is how well Webbula's services and solutions work, and that a lot of the providers end up relying on each other a lot of times. So I'd really rather just stick to Webbula. How good I know it is, right?
I hear you. That makes sense, and I respect that for sure.
Well, I will say this, though. I will say this. I believe there's a lot of obfuscation going on in the marketplace, and that it's important and incumbent upon the consumer to investigate and identify the providers that they're relying on. And I will say that. Mm-hmm. So if you have any questions or you want to talk to us in detail, we have an entire staff of salespeople who'll be happy to walk you through the process and show you why you should be relying on Webbula data in your next campaign.
I hear you, and I would echo the sentiment that we have a team of analysts on our team at the Relevancy Group that can discuss that as well. So
I'll just chime in and not to belabor this point, but I think that the players that were just mentioned versus they do different things, in my opinion. So but both can be used in parallel for very different things.
A few couple of simple questions. How do I implement Webbula? How do I get started?
Well, that's a fair question. So it's very easy. As a matter of fact, if you go to our website, webbula.com, WEBBULA.com, we offer a free trial. So we're more than willing to take your data and run it through through the cloud hygiene process and let you see what you've been missing, and try it out, give it a test drive. We take on data almost every day for this, so it's simple, it's easy. Our client portal that we can establish for you, it can drag and drop data, or you can send it to us through a wide variety of ways through FTP. We have an API service that connects directly, or we've even had those who just email us some data. But how we try to make it as easy as possible. You can do it right on the website. And as a matter of fact, in the next few months, we have a brand new client portal that'll be coming up, hopefully, and it'll make it even easier to manage your account and see your data. So we can't possibly make it any easier, I think, for people to at least give it a shot, try it out, and see for yourself what the results are.
Nice. I dig it. Interesting, a tandem of questions here, and I'm gonna toss them to both of you kind of in tandem here. One, which came in kind of early, is why are delivery rates trending downward, you think? And another one that came in later was, with all the delivery threats that we reviewed, why are delivery rates not falling faster? And I think those are interesting. I have a few thoughts there too, but David, you have a thought on kind of the current state of the delivery, and thoughts on either one of those two pieces?
Sure. I'll take a stab at it. So I think, as we mentioned earlier, there's absolutely been an increase in the last couple of years of just malicious actors, for lack of a better term, out there in whether that's people trying to get by a fraudulent type of thing, sort of the French fry example, but really then the malicious people, the sort of the Russian bot or those bot examples, where they're trying to infiltrate, and we see it a lot because we have a lot of free content, and sometimes the bots seems to be attracted to that word free. So there's more garbage out there. But again, I also think of just overall the consumer's appetite to, consume information. And we've seen, our attention spans actually decrease in the age of the mobile devices over the last several years. We've now seen the number of people increase to that, say their mobile phone is their primary personal inbox, to about 41% of the population. We know that pretty much everybody, it's a number like 87%, use their mobile phone to triage their email. But the fact that it's gone from about a third to about 41% over the last year that say it's my primary email device, it's driving more of it's just easier to swipe to the left and delete that stuff or purely ignore it. So we've seen, again, that gets back to the engagement notion. And also, some marketers are still not optimizing for mobile devices. So there's actually some technical things that are breaking down and impacting inbox delivery rates because of that, and the way ISPs are processing some of those messages. So those are a couple of things. But Brian, I know we were talking about this earlier, and you were sort of also hinting to some of the changes afoot because of some of the acquisitions that have been going on with some of the old, long-time email providers. Do you want to talk to that a bit?
Well, we're becoming increasingly concerned here at Webbula about some of the changes that have been happening over the past year. We actually have a blog post coming out tomorrow about it. But essentially, as we know, verification is really, when it comes right down to it, is a service that we provide as well. It's bundled with Cloud Hygiene. But it's a simple thing where you're basically checking for soft and hard bounces, and it's a on-off switch kind of thing. But a lot of email providers under what's become known as Oath, with Verizon, with AOL, with Yahoo, sort of all combining, have turned that service off. So there's a certain large black hole of emails out there that can no longer be verified. And it's a concern of ours because A, because they've done that, and B, because where do those people who are relying on that sort of service as their sole way of telling whether an email's real or not, where do they turn? And of course we want them to know that there's an alternative to that with Cloud Hygiene. There's other ways of finding out whether your emails are bad or not. But that's a growing concern too, and we're concerned that that sort of thing might continue to grow, and might Google might be looking into that too, or where is the industry going essentially over the next year, and how's that going to impact email marketers? So that's obviously a concern of ours.
Yep, yeah, that makes good sense, and those inbox providers, obviously they're serving the needs of their users, and so have kind of a lot of different stakeholders in that game. It's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out.
Should be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, indeed. Another one coming in from the crowd here. We have a relatively small email list, but it's an important piece of our business. How big of a list do I need to make a solution like Webbula worthwhile? I guess David and Brian, maybe what are your guys' thoughts about kind of a scale of a program, and maybe it has less to do with scale, maybe more around growth? Brian, David, you have thoughts on that?
I would say 100 billion emails. That was a joke, by the way.
Every email.
Exactly. No, I'm sort of tongue in cheek with it because I think it's important as you start to grow it, right? And it's I'll say, and I think we've proven it's affordable enough that it's got to be, an appropriate line item cost, so that as you're growing from 1,000 emails to then to tens of thousands and so on, that you have it built in, just like we've always advocated. You have A/B testing built into your email programs, or some sort of testing, so that it's not this afterthought or this, oh my gosh, it's an additional cost, that it's just part of what you're doing all the time to optimize your program.
Right.
Yeah, so Brian, I don't know if you have different thoughts, but maybe it's not 100 billion.
No, I think you hit it on the head. I think the important thing here is to know what your process is going to be, and set up a good process from the very beginning. Whether you're a very small business or you have a small list, the same processes, the same things you rely on are going to be the things that you're going to rely on when you have 10 million email addresses as well. Get your staff trained, get your people used to using the same tools that, quality, reliability, engagement, testing, metrics, all the things that email marketers should be relying on, and implement those, even if it's just you in an office sending out 1,000 emails. Those habits, those tools are going to be valuable to you as you grow, and good habits start, good habits start at home. But yes, essentially they do, really, when you think about it. So I think that's the most important thing. Now, I think too that possibly the question is, can Webbula help someone with a very small list? And I would recommend, go to our website, take a look at what we offer, call one of our salespeople. The phone numbers are on the website. They'll be more than happy to take your call and talk with them. They'll walk through it with you and review pricing and all the different options that you have, and that we'll try to work with you and customize a solution for you. So.
Yeah, great stuff. And I think that's a very interesting question. And I think from my perspective, it's a little counterintuitive, because obviously when you have a big program at scale, little impacts to delivery can have big impacts to the bottom line. But when you're small and a small sender, and maybe haven't yet established a positive sending reputation, or your reputation isn't as codified, if you will, as a larger sender, that those issues of quality are even more important, maybe, I think, right?
I think
because
the risk is higher, right?
Right.
The risk associated with a major national provider who's sending out 15 million emails. I mean, if a certain percentage of those get thrown into a blacklist or something, the risk is a little lower for them, as opposed to a small outfit who's sending out 1,000. If 35% of their emails out of 1,000 get into a blacklist, that's going to be catastrophic for them. So the risk is higher. Right.
Yeah, for sure. I totally buy that. And establishing those, establishing a positive reputation and having that base of solid data is the foundation of a good email program. And so no time like the present to get started, from my perspective. Another one coming from the crowd here, you mentioned inbox engagement as a component of deliverability. Can you expand on that? Do ESPs look at engagement? And that's actually an interesting question, because I think it's people have been on both sides of that for a while, but I think it's pretty clear that ESPs do now. Many of the biggies look at engagement as a component of deliverability. Am I wrong there, David and Brian?
Well, so I'll just jump in. ISP is definitely, no, you're not wrong. The Gmail is been sort of on the forefront of saying that they don't give away their whole entire formula, but it absolutely has an impact on not just getting delivered, but where you are placed within the inbox. I know, Brian, I'm sure you might have a more scientific answer than that, but.
Well, I think it's obvious that every provider has a different recipe, as it were, and that some of the percentages, some may put a little bit more emphasis on some things than they do others. but I think it's fair to say that most of them, at least most of the major providers at this point, are including engagement in that recipe. So I think it's definitely something that needs to be addressed. And on the other side of it too, though, is that, you know, high engagement rates with an engaged consumer base with your list is better for you as a business owner, as a marketer, than a non-engaged consumer list, right? So looking at it from that perspective, you want as high of an engagement rate as humanly possible with your consumers, with the people you're sending the list to. That's just going to translate to sales, obviously.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. And there are tactics that we work with clients where partitioning off, you know, the people that haven't been engaged for, say, 6 months, you know, taking them and sending them potentially even through a different ESP or certainly not through your primary IP sending address where it may impact your reputation. So sending it in another sort of mail stream, if you will, another IP address, is something that you may want to try. We've seen, again, it depends on your business model. We've seen sweepstakes and surveys sometimes work as a good thing to get those people that are not engaged, you know, engaged again. If it's not necessarily a totally promotional offer, but hey, give us your opinion. We've seen some things, again, it depends on how brand appropriate is, but you know, we've done work with Sephora in the past, and one of the campaigns that this was a number of years ago, but it was "Are you breaking up with us?" Yeah, so it was appropriate for their brand, not be appropriate for everybody, but yeah, an engaging subject line that's going to get, you know, people to notice you again potentially.
Right.
Yep.
I mean, obviously there's a component of this. No matter how clean the data, no matter how perfect, you know, there's a creative, you know, marketing aspect to it that each client has to sort of come to their own, you know, what's best for them. That you know, we can't really impact that side of the business. Obviously, you know, not all emails are created equal, but so
yeah, that actually leads to this last question I have here, which is, you mentioned early in the webinar different risk levels for different senders. Are those based on customer lifetime value of a customer, other metrics?
Well,
yeah.
Well, I mean, they can be. You know, every customer is different, obviously. We have one of the filters, and you brought it up earlier in the research, was the .govs, right, or military addresses. You know, a lot of times consumer-based emailers will want to avoid those. But again, you know, we have clients that come through the door who are targeting military, right? So or .gov employees. They may be a union association or someone who wants to communicate to those. So those are the types of that's easy. That's an easy filter off. Obviously, you know, we don't want to eliminate those. We actually want to target those. So, but again, that's the kind of intelligence that sometimes you know, our customers will get intelligence back from us that they didn't anticipate having, right? So it's like. You know, if we process 5 million or 6 million emails, and they get back, you know, that 23% of their email data is military personnel, you know, that might spark some ideas on their side that, you know, maybe they need to address that, right, and create a campaign specifically targeting those, or, you know, avoid them altogether. But I mean, that's the easy way to look at it. But sometimes there's the intelligence comes back that you weren't expecting, and it leads to further ideas on how to market.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Yep. I hear you loud. I hear you loud and clear on that.
A lot of times you learn things about your list that you didn't expect, you know, and that's always not always a bad thing.
Nope. At the Relevancy Group, we like more data. More data, the better, for sure. Brian, Webbula, David, thank you very much. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. I'd invite you to join us virtually every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. You may check out our events page at your convenience to check out the latest webinar information. We will be sending you an email with the recording and a copy of the research. You can also check us out on webinarwednesdays.online for on-demand copies of all of our webinars. We very much appreciate you making the time today. And Brian and David, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great day.